Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please watch our Gracefully Graying YouTube channel and also visit and like our Gracefully Graying website. Today on Gracefully Graying, I'm very pleased to welcome back as my guest Lisa Zastrow, who is a partner in the Las Vegas, Nevada office of the multi-state Lipson Neilson firm, as we discuss some of the issues of what are the limits of free speech in the office, what are the do's and don'ts. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
First of all, Lisa, why don't we just jump right in and let's talk about emails or texts at work. I mean, I know we all text, we all do emails, and sometimes if you push the wrong button at the wrong time, it can come back to haunt you. So tell us about that.
Absolutely. This actually just happened to me last week in a case. I wasn't the one that sent the email, but whether it's an inadvertent, you reply all, and somebody who's not intended recipient receives something, that can come back to haunt you. And this is something that's just evolved in the last decade, but as professionals, most employers now expect their employees to have technology, which includes your cell phone for text messaging and Outlook for email. And we conduct business on both of those platforms. And it wasn't until probably 5 years ago that clients and colleagues are routinely sending text messages. Before it was just email. And typically you would sit down at your laptop or your computer in your office, in 2000. And then employees would get BlackBerries or their, iPhones, and you'd have access to your email on your work phone. And now, not only emails, we have text messages. And so when you as an employee, whether you're an attorney or an accountant or a therapist or a doctor or a used car salesman or whatever your profession, if you are communicating with clients or colleagues through your devices, you have to exercise extreme caution, because most of us now, or I shouldn't say most of us, many of us have one device. Got my iPhone sitting here, I've got my laptop, and we interchange what we say. I might email my dad in Oklahoma and say, can't wait to see you for Father's Day. And the next email I'm talking about work. And the law on these issues is fluid. It's changing. It's almost to a point now where if you are an employer, if you own a business, you almost have a duty to your company and your clients to educate yourself on these issues on a yearly basis or a bi-yearly basis, because technology is moving at breakneck speed. And so, in terms of what's contained in the emails and what's contained in the text messages, it depends. If you inadvertently send a text message to your boss that was meant for your husband and you say something sexual, you're probably not going to get terminated for that, but you might. But if you send that to your boss, that's sexual harassment. So there are a number of bright line tests, which we've talked about before. We can't discriminate in the workplace, whether that's through emails, text messages, or our dialogue or our conduct. The same rules apply in emails. And if you are using a work device, your employer can access that information, and they can, and they will use that against you. And you only asked me about text messages and emails, but the other thing, employers now are looking at social media. It's not just text messaging. People use WhatsApp. Are you familiar with that? We're on a Zoom meeting. The technology is there's almost nothing you can do now that's not recorded. And so it's very complicated for individuals now in 2021 who are working to try to separate their work-life balance. So,
Jack, Lisa, especially for those of us who are working a lot from home, it's like, I think often when you're in an office, there's a more formal demeanor than we've had over the last year during the pandemic. And especially as we're working at home, it's like you have to shift gears all the time. So it may be a little more difficult.
It's very difficult. I'm in my front room right now. And you're exactly right. Things just become naturally more informal. You know, for me, I'm an attorney, so I've seen a lot of things on the media, on the web with attorneys that have appeared via Zoom and forget to mute their phone or forget to blank out their video, and their dog jumps up on the screen. A colleague of mine yesterday was in a video deposition, and they took a break, and she informed me that opposing counsel's client continued to talk. And my colleague, my partner, was nice enough to say, "Your mic is still on. I can hear you." I'm not sure I would have done that, but you're exactly right. It's more, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, and it's complicated for employers to try to get a handle on how to create a productive workplace and a workplace that's free from harassment. And we want our employees to have that collegiality. And we also want our clients to be happy. And it's a constant battle, and it's a constant balancing act. And the rules change. The rules are changing weekly. It's very.
Are there some topics that are clearly off limits?
Sure, and they're the same topics that have been off limits, for decades. Discriminatory speech, discriminatory conduct, hate, bullying, racist, any dialogue in the office that's going to alienate your colleagues. So that definition 20 years ago, 40 years ago would be pretty simple. But now guess what? That definition is expanding, and so now it's not just discriminatory speech or sexual harassment. Now we have to take a microscopic look at that. And what is the definition of that? Well, the definition changes. What is the definition, for example, of hate speech? Your question is, what is prohibited speech in the workplace? Well, I can tell you, hate speech, sexual discrimination, discrimination against orientation of who you are as a person, as an individual. And why is that? Because we have federal and state laws that guarantee individuals the right to a harassing-free workspace. And outside of work, those things, especially hate speech, is illegal in categories because it can incite violence. But what's happening now is, I used to give CLEs and we could just talk about that, and I could show up some PowerPoint presentations with, a woman with a skirt, to her knees, and a man behind her with a ooh look on his face, is it harassment? Well, now it's, all of a sudden, I'm not giving you an opinion on this, but now in the last year, maybe some would say 3 or 4 years, we have a society that's evolving in how they want to identify. And we can, some want to identify with different pronouns. I'm sure you've heard of that. I'm biologically a female, but if I identify in a certain way and I want you to use certain pronouns, they, the, their, them, and you as my boss refer to me as a she, and that's not what I want. Is that sexual harassment? Is it identity discrimination? Those are the issues that are going to be coming down the pike. And it's very important for business owners, and not just because we don't want to get sued. but because we want to have an environment where people are productive and not distracted, right? I mean, if you want to identify as a certain gender or whatever, that's your right to do that. And employers have to learn to evolve with society. So when you say, are there topics off limits in the workplace? Yeah, sex, drugs, rock and roll, gender discrimination. But how do you define hate speech, Henry? I mean, 20 years ago, actually, let's say in the 80s, hate speech, symbolic hate speech, we could all agree the swastika or the Nazi symbol would be hate speech. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I watched the Dukes of Hazzard and I forgot the name of the car. I had the Confederate flag. Well, we all know what the Confederate flag is a symbol of, but over the last couple of decades, it has now become a symbol of racism in many, many minds. But there are still some Southern, stubborn individuals that don't want to let go of that Southern pride, and they don't view it that way. So is the Confederate flag hate speech? And if you are in your office and you have a Confederate flag hanging in your office, are you violating the law? Probably.
I think you are. I mean,
Probably. You probably are. But my point is, do you see how things evolve?
Or marching through the Capitol with a Confederate flag? Clearly.
Absurd. Well, that to me is an overt act to incite. I mean, to me, it's different. You have to look at everything contextually. If you walk into the U.S. Capitol waving a Confederate flag, your intent is to send a message. It's not rocket science, right? No. But if you go into some, 85-year-old grandfather in Louisiana, and in his living room, he's had the same Confederate flag that he's had, in his living room for 50 years, that's in his home, and maybe he's not a racist, but the context is different.
Agreed. Lisa, what about political issues in the office?
Oh, well, this is just, I just love this because, it's rapidly evolving. And I had my first cup of tea, bad taste. You would think that certain events happen. Let's say the president of the United States is being inaugurated. You would think you could go into the office that day and say something, well, is happening in our, the United States of America. We're getting a new president today. But even that now may incite some offensive reaction. And so I personally, if I'm advising employers, I would say that it's best practice to have policies and procedures that curtail political speech in the workplace. And it's a balance. If you're sitting at the water cooler and you've got two individuals with completely opposing views talking, it's outside the purpose of the work, right? Let's say you're in an accounting firm, and people overhear that. It's offensive. It can be offensive no matter which side you're on. And now there's not two sides. Now there's 30 sides, right? So if I'm advising an employer, I'm going to tell the employer, you need to set some basic rules and guidelines for political speech in your office. But again, the problem that I'm personally seeing is now the definitions are changing, and what used to be acceptable, for example, like, I don't know if you can see it, I have an American flag in my background. Well, my husband's a retired lieutenant colonel. now, and I actually in my office had an American flag and some other, patriotic symbols that 10 years ago, non-issue, nobody cares. Now someone sees that and might be offended, So I think it's just wise. And again, I don't like this. You haven't asked me yet about chilling speech, but I don't like the trend that this country is taking. I really don't.
It's a very sad trend. What about boundaries between an employee and an employer? I mean, are those less rigid, more rigid?
Well, the one thing we can't teach on a video podcast is, how to instill common sense on everybody that may be watching. It always amazes me. And first of all, the one thing I'm realizing is the issue of boundaries is generational. It's incredible to me. It's up to the employer, first of all, to establish boundaries. But to me, as an employee, you've got to create a boundary between the types of communications that you have with your clients. You shouldn't be calling up your clients and saying, "Oh, did you see the Democratic debate last night?" Unless you have that rapport, or call up your client or text your client, dirty jokes. I mean, if you don't know that that's crossing a boundary, you need, but what I'm seeing is there is a difference and it's generational. It seems that certain generations have a more clear concept of boundaries.
What about the fact, Lisa, that baby boomers are becoming a very active and loud voice on social media?
Well, I think that's why this topic is important because, I think that they need to be aware that some of the things that, first of all, I would make sure that anybody who's using social media understands privacy settings. You asked me about setting boundaries. So baby boomers, whether you're working or not, you need to have privacy settings on your social media. It's highly advisable to not allow your colleagues or coworkers or clients to have access to your social media. Lock it down. I have, my social media is completely locked down. You can't see it. But I have a LinkedIn. So when I'm talking about common sense, setting boundaries, pretty easy. You want to have social media for business, use LinkedIn. That's what that platform is for. You want to use your Facebook and you want to go off on rants or post porn or whatever, don't have your boss on your Facebook. So, set boundaries. But I see a lot of individuals in their 50s and 60s and 70s posting things on social media. Usually it's religious in nature, biblical scriptures and things like that, which now can be a triggering thing for some employers. Baby boomers still have a very, I don't mean to stereotype, but are very strong patriotic, commitment to this country, the U.S. And, with the recent tearing down of monuments, George Washington, Abe Lincoln. Last year I was seeing, all my mom's friends posting about, how dare you tear down these statues? And I understand that generation, it seems insane and it seems like a normal and acceptable opinion to not want to forget about our history. But if you say something like that on social media and your employer sees it or a client sees it and they are of the opinion that Abe Lincoln, was a racist slave owner and now we need to be more sensitive, that could be a problem. So, baby boomers don't get a free pass just because they grew up in a different generation. They need to understand. And I don't agree with it, Henry. I don't agree with it. But you don't have, let's say this, you have the right to free speech, but you're not free from the consequences of what you say.
So be careful what you say and think before you speak, think before you push that computer send button. I mean, you've really got to be careful. We live in a very chilling environment, for lack of a better word. How do we balance chilling speech?
Well, but Henry, you said think before you speak. And here's what I'm running into. What I think may be different from what you think is acceptable. Or what I think, yeah, and it's very difficult to teach or to explain boundaries and good common sense without agreeing or disagreeing with the topic. And I'm finding, and maybe this is offensive, so be it, I'll take it. I am finding that the younger generation now does not have a sense of those boundaries in the workplace in terms of what they say. And so when you say, be careful what you send, well, how do you explain that? I mean, I know what that means, but for someone who has been raised and told that they're entitled to free speech and they're entitled to say whatever they want and they can identify with whatever pronouns they want, and they can come into your office and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, but I'm identifying that what you said is 100% accurate. Be careful what you say, be careful before you push that button. But the problem is, how do you define that?
It's a good question. I guess it goes back, I think, what about the golden rule? I mean, do unto others what you want done unto you, and that would really take care of it. And then we have to go through things that are taboo, comments regarding race or ethnic background. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's taboo and it's common sense. And like you said, the golden rule is 100% the way I try to live my life. But even I, I would say even I should say always I always get in trouble. But I try to live my life with the golden rule, but I have a warped, sick sense of humor. And so sometimes I may say something that, I think is funny or will make someone laugh. And it doesn't, so, but live your life by the golden rule. And if you're in a work environment, keep it to the topic at hand and try to be unemotional. The other thing too, and not to go off topic, but when you start talking about race, religion, gender, all of those things are emotional, right? They raise an emotional response. Well, when we are working and me as an attorney, if I'm focusing on a brief, I don't want that, clouding my judgment. I want to focus on the law and the issues. We don't want to be, distracted by things that are emotional, like race, gender, religion, all of those things. So, pornography, I mean, that's something that's prohibited in the workplace and has been forever. That's not going to change. Right. It's not going to change.
What about complaints about a co-employee?
I'm sorry?
What about complaints about a co-worker in the office?
Well, as management, if a colleague or a coworker brings a complaint to your attention, you have to have boundaries set within your policies and procedures manuals. And we've talked about this before. I mean, the golden rule, you said, you live your life by the golden rule. Well, employers have to add to that with their employee handbook, unless it's a union, and then they have their collective bargaining agreement. But your employee handbook should be very expressed about what is prohibited in the workplace. And so if somebody comes to you with a complaint, you have to handle it the way it's dictated in your policies and procedures. You have to investigate what was said. Who was it said to? Was this something sent through social media or through email? So did it violate the company electronic media email policies, or was it just two employees arguing at the water tank or over coffee? But you can't have colleagues bickering over whatever issue, it creates a hostile work environment.
Lisa, what about issues regarding age discrimination and free speech in the workplace?
You said you wanted to go quick today.
We're coming around because we are running out of time again.
Well, I could tell you this, it's illegal. Age discrimination is illegal, and there's no free speech in the workplace. I can tell you that repeatedly. There is no free speech in the workplace. Hear me loud and clear, 25-year-olds and 60-year-olds. You're not entitled to it. Say what you want with caution. You can be terminated. It is what it is. And age discrimination, what I'm seeing a lot of actually is retaliation. Somebody gets terminated and then they file a age discrimination complaint against their employer. So if you are an employer, you are highly advised to increase your rules, policies, procedure training within your workplace. And you have to enforce your own work policies and procedures without exception. You start making exceptions for one person, that's disparate treatment. So you lay down the law, you require your employees to all maintain that and have the golden rule, and everybody's happy and, productive work environment.
What about toxic work environment? How do you get away from that, or how do you deal with that?
Well, I've been in many toxic work environments. And again, the question is, how do you define that? And you can Google it, but if you're going into work every day and there's this dark cloud because of bickering or harassment, or your boss is bullying you, or you're a female and your colleague is male and you're getting dumped on and he is not, that's actually illegal. Toxic work environment can be something that an employee can claim is a hostile work environment. But what creates a toxic work environment is an employee that values their own rights above the team of the staff. And you can't really have that. You have to have a team environment. That's why you have to enforce the rules across the board. So, a hostile or a toxic work environment would be exactly what common sense would tell you. If somebody's spouting off discriminatory slurs, hate speech, that's toxic. And no employer wants that.
No, Lisa, we're literally out of time. Give us 5 short takeaways, kind of summing up what we've been discussing on this really broad topic before we sign off.
Sure. So the first thing, what I said, if you're going to have social media, no matter what your age is, if you have public social media, you're doing that at your own risk. Because anybody can obtain what you say online, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and they can use that against you. And if you think that they can't, you are wrong. And it can be used against you by your employer. It can be used against you by the masses, as we discussed last time with cancel culture. So lock down your social media, or speak at your own risk, number one, and learn about it. Learn about privacy controls and what big tech is able to access through your social media and through your work media. Secondarily, don't pretend, or don't, if you're in your 20s and you're listening to me, your life has no greater value than your colleagues. And you don't have any right to free speech in the workplace. And if you want to exercise your free speech, that's your choice, but you can be, you may pay some consequences for that. And lastly, there are some topics that you can be protected. And we talked about this last time. The National Labor Relations Act does guarantee that employees can discuss some things in the workplace. So know your rights, know your employer's rights. Proceed with caution. And if you're an employer, this is the advice I have from you. Educate yourself with some professionals. If not me, you can retain lawyers that will come in and give free seminars in CLE and update those definitions on a bi-yearly basis.
Lisa, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying, and I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. And again, please visit our YouTube channel for this video and many, many more. And also please visit gracefullygraying.com, our website, and share and like it. Again, thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Henry.